now we have an amazing panel. I keep saying that, but this is an amazing panel. And the moderator is a lady by Shelley Peterson. Now, if you don't know Shelley, you need to. She is, it says here, XR industry pioneer, and I don't think actually that says enough about what Shelley's done. I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about her work, but she is definitely one of the kind of leading people in this industry. So she's going to be running this panel, and there's a bunch of really good guys and, yeah, good guys there. So Shelley, come on up. And all of you, come on. Don't, no, they've all stopped there.
Y'all come up. Thank you. How's everybody doing today? Yeah. So you're back for the security panel, which I'm excited to have. The experience in this group is impressive, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a second. But we definitely have industry experts. If you've been in the industry for very long, you'll recognize some of these people. As a matter of fact, let's just go ahead and start with introductions. So, sure. Have your name, your company, and your primary role.
All right. So I'm Kurt Schuringer. I work for Amazon Web Services. I'm one of our principal spatial computing experts, and primarily what we do is, we work with a lot of the customers and enterprises for prototyping, specifically in the space, and we help them kind of strategize and work through solutions to be able to scale their products.
Dr. Brian Laughlin, Boeing Tech Fellow, work in BR&T, primarily focused on applications for XR for the factory, and then other kind of cognitive and advanced visualization technologies. Most of the stuff we work on is around helping to facilitate the build of airplanes, engineering, prototyping type work, things like that.
I'm Kenny Crooks with Northrop Grumman. I'm an NG Fellow. I'm responsible for the reliability, maintainability, and also model-based sustainment. I am the enterprise lead for our digital transformation office, which is pushing initiatives for sustainment, is enabling not only Northrop Grumman, but also the warfighter to have the new technologies and edge capabilities to support the mission overall. And definitely our domain is, keep pushing the envelope for where digital transformation is taking us. XR capabilities, predictive analytics, model-based and model-centric is really our focus.
James Cooper, Chief Technologist for Advanced Visualization at Raytheon, basically responsible for understanding the various use cases, needs, and opportunities across Raytheon that might be answered by a visualization solution. I'm also the committee chair for the security committee with AREA, which Mark Sage, our MC, kind of talked about this morning. So you want to know more about the area, please talk to him.
I'm JB Farge. I used to work for Subsea 7. I was the global manager for responsible to introduce and scale XR solution. I spent the last 7 years trying to do that, and now I've joined another company after that, but I will definitely speak about my experience in trying to scale XR in subsea oil and gas service industry.
Hi, my name is Chris Goss. I'm with Walt Disney Imagineering. I lead a product development group that is responsible for software technologies that support the creative design and delivery of attractions and experiences all around the world. One of my groups focuses on visualization, pre-visualization, and how we use XR to get a sense of creative intent and construction feasibility of what it is that we are producing for our guests.
And I'm Shelley Peterson. I've worked in the industry since about 2001 for Lockheed and then for Microsoft, and now I have a company, Wizard Wells Consultancy. Now, when I say these are a group of experts, by my calculations, you have over 80 years of XR experience on the stage here. So that should speak for itself, but I'll give you another example. So back before 1990, the term augmented reality was not known. And that came about from a Boeing engineer, Tom Caudell, who came up with augmented reality. I think it was around 1991 or 1992. And Brian, did you have a chance to work with Tom at Boeing?
You're outing me. I'm actually much younger than that. I started when I was 6, so I'm pretty young. Yeah, actually, I was very fortunate back in that time. I was a young 20-something-year-old guy, and I was in meetings with those guys. I was Tom Claudel and Dave Meisel was the second one. But I was investigating wearable technology at the time.
So you get the picture here. We have some experts who are working way back in the day on this technology. I want to run a quick poll with the audience and then a poll for the panelists so that we kind of get to know each other. How many of you are working with XR within your organizations currently? Excellent. XR conference, that's a good answer. How many people are currently taking security into consideration in the efforts that you're working? Excellent. That's fantastic to see. Good answer. Okay, how many people are in the very early stages and are trying to determine whether you want to bring in XR technology, or you consider yourself the very early stages in getting started? Okay, excellent. Okay, and for our panelists, how many of you consider security to be your primary function? Okay, so my point here is that while it's not their primary function, it's something that they're all considering and working actively within their organization. And I think many of you are in the same situation. And for those who are new, this is something to take into consideration. If you ask an XR expert for tips in implementation, one of the things that you've heard at this conference and that you'll hear from many is that you need to include IT and security very early, even on day one. And you'll hear that over and over and over. And many of us did that, and I think that it has helped out. Yesterday, we heard from Krista Watry from Dynepic. And Krista had 5 tips for us to consider. And number 2 on her list was security is not an afterthought. Now, this is a person who's leading training solutions for the defense industry. So given that we know that we need to include these organizations early, what strategies would you all recommend to ensure that security is not an afterthought? And I'll leave it open to who wants to start with that.
There's one thing I'd say to start off the conversation on that is the fact that, so Subsea 7, for instance, their core competency is not security. So when I introduce HoloLens to you, or any device that record, has cameras, has storage, there's a whole thing that needs to happen about, okay, what is the new data that we are actually capturing, and how does that data transfer in and out? Because I'm going to be in the middle of the sea, I'm going to be in infrastructure that are like very sensitive, where oil and gas is being extracted and stored, and if I have nefarious actors that can actually get onto this data, what can happen? So there's something that we had no idea to handle that. So there's like a conversation with IT. Hey, this is a device. This is what the stream of data happening between the process and the software that we have. How do we make that secure? So it's very much a conversation starter, definitely with IT.
I would say one experience I have, especially figuring out model tracking and overlay on one of our government aircraft. Site security came out and was like totally just jumped on me, basically like, what are you doing with this iPad and what are you recording, and let's look at your history. And I'm like, I'm just using XR, I'm not recording anything, I'm overlaying a model, like, we don't know what you're talking about, come with us. So definitely you have to figure out, like, hey, what are the do's and don'ts of when you have wearables, you have devices, because they can record, they can do a lot of things, especially you're dealing with classified information or for official use only. So those are definitely ingrained to everything we do. But sometimes we don't think about it because we're like, hey, it's just a picture. And it's not a picture, there's metadata. There's a lot of things associated with that. And if you're not aware and you don't have cybersecurity involved, you don't have your customer involved, that is the longest pole and hurdle to get through, because just getting overall awareness of what we're trying to accomplish, it's just like, oh, a lot of times is we have AI agents. Our generation now, the kids, they live with that. It's very natural to them. The older generation, some of those gray beards, is like, what are you trying to accomplish here? So it's kind of a push and pull kind of scenario, and it's really our job to inform what we're trying to do and assure that we have security is in our forefront when we think about these solutions.
Right. I'd say a lot of us, probably all of us, have had experiences where, we have a confrontation with security, and we don't want that. And so we tend to shy away. We're like, okay, I don't want to talk to these security guys up front because it's just going to be a fight, and you try to put it off, but that's just going to make it worse ultimately, of course. So you want to approach them early on, and you want to say, I want you to be a partner in this. We want to have that conversation, that discussion, that understanding as we're moving forward through this. And so it's definitely the approach you need to take rather than putting it off and just letting things simmer and get worse.
I'm more of a creative technologist than anything else, and my job is really to translate the technology for creative artists. And one of the things that I often ask our security teams is really get to the root of why. Help me understand why we are implementing X. Help me understand the jargon. Help me understand what these acronyms mean or why we're installing this or what this thing is going to do. Because I often find that in big organizations, which I've been in a few of them, that often kind of gets glossed over, and people just don't actually understand what it is that we're trying to protect and why we're trying to protect it and what it is that we're doing to protect it. And I think that why is really crucial to understand from the beginning, and I often love to see it more talked about up front in a way that's tangible to all audiences versus just, hey, here's a technical implementation of X.
And I'll kind of share like a quick story. So my past experiences, I worked 12 years at Lockheed Martin, similar to a lot of you in the DoD industry, and I worked a lot with XR. And what you see here is when you first get started, right, you worry about the devices, you worry about the use cases. Once I shifted to Amazon Web Services, everything was about the data strategy, how do we feed those? And so those are the areas that I do focus on quite a bit. And one of the stories actually from back at Lockheed was, what data are we putting on there? And it's not just the data that you're looking at right now, it's some of these training packages and work instruction packages are potentially terabytes big, and they're all on the device, right? And just because you're looking at one piece doesn't mean that there's not a whole range of other data that sits on there that you may not notice. So if that device goes missing, you also got to worry about what other data was on there that wasn't just what you were looking at, but what somebody else was using on there previously. And so those are some of the considerations that may not come to the forefront, but you have to also look as part of like your full data strategy, not just for like the XR device, but the full pipeline as it goes through each one of the stages. And so one of the things you'll probably hear me mention a lot is like part of that data strategy, like what are the things that you can do to make sure that's secure?
So I think one more element that we haven't probably covered yet is the fact that outside of the data, and I mean really good points that everybody's made, is that that device is another threat vector that you're introducing onto your network. So a lot of times we don't think about this. In fact, I was very fortunate got to go to a seminar, the Way of the Wolf. It was a red team seminar for the military. And I was surprised to find out that the #1 threat vector is actually printers. And the reason why is because people don't think about the printer, right? It's kind of a boring thing. It just sits in the back office, and you put paper in it when you need it. You complain about the price of ink. But a lot of times they don't get updated frequently enough. And so you have this terrific threat vector, and a lot of times that's what the hackers go after. And so anytime we introduce a new device onto our networks, a HoloLens, a Google Glass, whatever the heck it might be, you're introducing a new threat vector, and it's not just the data that's on that device, but it's also the door that you're creating into your network. That can be a potential risk. So, and to answer your original question, I think it's really important that we put it into our implementation plans, and you bake it into your plans, not kind of sprinkles and frosting on top of the cake. It has to be cake. It has to be part of your implementation.
So you hinted at this, and I'm going to expand upon it. So on the threat landscape, when we look at the threat landscape, it's quite alarming. One source states that there are 36 million hack attempts on the defense industry per day. 36 million per day, okay? Now, we have various threat vectors. There's very new technology, which can impose threats And we see organizations trying to access through these new technologies. And like you mentioned with the printers, there's very old technology that also opens up the potential for threats. We've seen things about pagers recently in the news. Other devices can be a concern. Many of us can't even take a key fob into our work environments because it can store data. So can you expand upon some of the things that you've seen with potential threats and threat vectors? Any insight there?
So one of the things that you guys might be familiar with, and it's not throwing them under the bus or anything, but recently down in the area where they have all the demos and whatnot, you might have seen some little QR codes that were on some little cards that were distributed across all the different tables. Where that can be alarming and potentially dangerous is, I don't know if you guys are familiar, there's a couple different scams that are going on pretty widely, especially in bigger cities and whatnot. Credit card skimmers, and then the second one is QR codes. And so what they'll do is, a lot of us pay for our parking with a QR code, and you scan that with your phone, and then you enter in data and stuff. Well, they'll actually put a sticker over the top of the original legitimate QR code. The reason why it's a threat vector is that can introduce you into a nefarious program that could then ask you for data or pull things off your phone, could get your address list, it could get passwords, all those kind of things. So we have to be very deliberate and think in advance about, what are we trying to do, and what are the different potential threats that could come to us. So.
And that's much more of a constructive conversation if you go ahead of time and then put those items and have that conversation with your IT and your cybersecurity thing. Okay, I know I'm introducing, I'm planning to introduce this. I know these are the threats that are potentially out there. Can you help me? And that helps wonders. If you guys are trying to introduce devices and you have already those line items and you can go towards them and have those conversations, it helps tremendously.
Yeah, not all threats are obvious. We're all kind of aware that we don't have relatives that left us millions of dollars over in Kudos. So don't put in your personal information. But yeah, just to that insight is the QR code is, you can't become complacent on some of the efficiencies or capabilities of some of this technology. And some of the times when we deal with our vendors, the software and hardware, they just look at us cross-eyed when we're like, hey, what is your security compliance and your FedRAMP and da-da-da-da, and like, well, we just made this device for you. We do things. I don't know what you're asking for us. So definitely that's one of the things is having not only your company, but your partners that you're involved with understand what your mission is also and your objectives, because that can hold you up and hold back the capabilities you're trying to facilitate.
Yeah, I mean, as Kenny's talking about complacency, and one of the major threat vectors in any organization is the insider threat, the people that either are actively trying to cause harm or just aren't thinking about it and unintentionally cause harm. And so some of the things that we do, there is companies, especially in the defense industry, we get beaten into us all the security training every year. You take the refresher training every year. But we're also thinking on the other end too, and so the Immersive Design Center team that I'm part of, that is sitting largely there at the table, we look at other things too, like, okay, how can we adapt the technology, perhaps put another layer in the technology so that people are using it, if they happen to lapse into complacency, there's still some security protections in there that'll help it on the other end of that kind of spectrum as well.
So there's one interesting one that came about recently with a little bit of a human engineering one, is back when the HoloLens first came out and people started typing in the air their passwords, right? Well, they started being able to use computer vision to actually know where on the keyboard you're pressing just based on doing this. And then with the advent of some of the newer pass-through technologies where now you can see your eyes in the front, I believe it was one of the research groups actually came out with the ability just to track your eyes to see where your eyes were going, to now type in your password and get access to the device. So it's crazy, some of the things that are just very new, cool features, but now they just introduce a brand new threat because now they can see exactly where you're looking, what your passwords are accordingly. So that was just very interesting when I saw that research article. It came out about a couple months ago.
Well, a really good point was made about threat vectors are not always obvious. You guys probably remember a few years back we had the big Target breach, and they got a bunch of credit card numbers. And the way that actually occurred was a small company, an HVAC company, was actually doing repair on an air conditioner. And so Target was really locked down. They had all their stuff, all their ducks in a row and T's crossed and I's dotted. However, this HVAC guy unwittingly came in there and tried to service their AC. And once he connected, he was infected. Once he connected to the network, they found their way to the credit card system. And then at the point of sale, and then all the credit cards were compromised. So really important point that these things are not obvious. Another more recent article that just came out, you guys might have seen, I think it was MIT. They had some students that took the AI and they applied it to machine vision, and they can now, they were actually doxing people where they could go and look at somebody and it would take their face and it would go back and match their profile and it would provide their address, phone number, all the different things. So it's really interesting, the area that we're getting into. And as soon as we build a better mousetrap, a better mouse comes up. So I think we have to be ever vigilant. And it's usually the human factor, by the way, that's the problem on most of these. We can lock everything down to the hilt. And if we don't address the human issues, then we have a huge gap.
I think it circles back to what Chris mentioned as well, where if your security teams will tell you the why, why there are certain restrictions or what they're trying to solve. With these new and emerging technologies, we can sometimes find alternatives or find ways or create other methods that fits the requirements. I didn't realize QR codes were a concern when I first started working with mixed reality, where you scan the QR code and then it overlays the content on the structure. They made me aware that that was not the most desirable capability for various security reasons, and then they became quite happy when we went to markerless. So sometimes knowing what the concern is helps us to create a roadmap that fits a little bit better into the organization. There's the threats of the technology. Do you see any areas where the new and different capabilities of XR tech helps us with security concerns?
Yeah, I think the one that comes right off the top of mind is you start seeing a lot of like streaming technologies. So right, you heard me on the first answer of, you download everything to the device. Streaming also has the benefit of you actually don't need to download all that content on the device. Now you're streaming it live from the server. Yes, there's some other issues and technical perspectives that you have to look at as part of that. But now at least that content is no longer being downloaded. It's only what the user needs and sees. And once the stream is killed, all that data does not reside on the device. So that's a technology that's coming about for actually other purposes, but also helps with security perspectives.
Okay.
So I think another way that we can help to address this is, security used to look something like you build this really big castle and then you dig a moat around it really deep and then you can't get across that. Maybe you put alligators and set something on fire, I don't know. Today that doesn't work anymore. We have to be more differential about how we apply security and making sure that we're not only from a cost perspective, but a performance perspective and other reasons as well, but that we secure the things that need more secure into the level and in the ways that they need to be secured. So one of the things that I think can help us moving forward is to look at more of a, today security is generally a password, something I know, maybe a biometric, something I am, retinal scan, and maybe a smart badge, something I have. How about someplace I am? How about in the presence of what? How about at a time of day or which kind of devices? So I think we're gonna have to go to more of an in-tiered kind of a key architecture that will require a syndrome of events and entities to be present in order for us to perform some kind of a job task, for example, to protect the data. So I think they're, in the same way that we have these new and emerging problems come out, I think they also offer solutions in different ways as well if we think about them differently.
Excellent. So many of the questions so far have been focused on defense, but how many people in the audience work in the defense industry? Okay.
What about PubSec in general, like other areas? Is there anybody else out in PubSec? Just curious. Okay.
Okay, and how many people are working with XR not in the defense industry? Okay. There's still many areas where we need to protect data for IP, for PII. I'm even working with a school right now who's asking questions about how they address PII for students. And Chris, this makes me think of what you're doing and what do you have to consider in terms of protections or sensitive data?
Yeah, historically, if you look at filmmaking, one of the trends of filmmaking around security is watermarking. I don't know if you've ever followed your favorite actor, actress. Oftentimes they will post the first day of shooting, they'll post a picture of themselves at a table read, and on the table will be a script, and there'll be a big watermark of their name across the page of the script, and every script page thereafter will be watermarked. And that's been like kind of a staple in the filmmaking movie industry, and that's carried over into theme parks and other formats and digital content creation, is this notion of watermarking. And so for us, it's the sense of, how do we protect folks from sharing the IP that they're excited about? Because one of the things that I feel like as an Imagineer myself is I was a fan first of what we do before I ever became an Imagineer, and continue to be a fan this day. So I get really excited about the work that I get to work on. And so a watermark is simply a reminder to me of, hey, don't share this. And it's a quick reference to me of, hey, and we're going to protect, your identity in terms of reminding you not to share it. In the XR space, a watermark and the parallax efforts of a watermark in the XR space we have not solved for yet, and is actually causing some motion sickness challenges for us. And so what does that look like in a headset, and what are the needs, and other solutions there that provide kind of the similar concepts around watermarking that the industry itself, the media industry, has embraced as a solution? How do we look at that in the XR environment? So we've played with a few things, but I think we have some work to do there to crack that nut a little further for us.
Okay. And by the way, we're going to save a little bit of time for questions. So if you have a question to ask the experts here, we'll get to that here in just a little bit, but I'm also going to take a question that came across through the app. So this question is, in early communications with potential vendors, what are some good questions to ask and acceptable responses from them in regard to security?
I think the first thing that I ask is, are you a SaaS solution? Essentially, one of the big things for enterprises is if they're a SaaS-only solution, most likely your security teams will not allow you to use that. And it's a big mistake. A lot of people go down this path. They bring in the vendor. They spend a lot of time with them, only to be rejected because they don't have an on-prem solution. And although some partners may cringe in the room, right, when they hear that, but it's the truth when you're working in enterprise. You have a lot of IP data. Enterprises don't allow that to essentially leave your environment, leave the cloud of your accounts, wherever it may be, or on-prem. And so always double check to make sure that they have some on-prem solution as part of that, because that will kill it pretty fast if they don't.
That's also speaking to the amount of managing expectation for my your IT team, and understanding the why, just like Chris was saying. If you understand what they care for, then you can make your to-do list to what asking to your vendors. Yeah.
And tying into threat vectors and kind of understanding about the provenance of components too, it's kind of an increasing thing where, of course, there was a story about the military using a lot of DJI drones for various activities. And then eventually they said, those are Chinese drones. We don't really know what's inside of them, what they're doing, so let's stop using those. Same thing in a lot of the defense industry too, where if we want to put some of our display technologies into, say, more secure spaces, classified spaces, we need to know what the provenance are. Is it TAA compliant? Things like that. So, depending on the use case, who the user is going to be, what the content's going to be, you might have these additional questions that need to be asked as well.
So I think in addition to the aspects of the software, I think we need to really scrub our processes and what it is that we intend to do with this, and make sure that we're only providing what's required in order to get the job done. A lot of times we end up providing things that are superfluous to what it is we're trying to accomplish, and less data is better.
I'm going to add actually one more perspective on it. Sorry. From an IP perspective, actually being non-agnostic is actually potentially a security concern. So think about it from the perspective of, if you go with a partner and they have agnostic formats, agnostic processes, potentially not the ability to be able to pull your data out, if they ever go out of business or you need to actually change your software and your data may be locked in that system, that poses a whole different concern because now you potentially have data loss, which could be a security concern in the same regard. So that is something that I always also ask is like, what is your data formats and can I pull my data out if I need to?
Yeah, especially multi-tenant type of capabilities, you have to consider that security model with that as well. The one thing it kind of turned us sideways was thinking the absence of information is information, especially with some of these models where we want to not show intellectual property, but the void of where something is in the model, people can figure out what is in that space. So we have to, we have to be very mindful, especially when you're given XYZ coordinates of very, like for us, mission capable or critical essential functions of our systems. We can't just openly put that out there. So we have to recharacterize our models. We have to break them down very specifically so you cannot compile them back together to go, oh, this is what this system is. So that's one, you think about the things in front of you, but the things at the absence of it, it's like, oh, we weren't even thinking that way. So.
In my early days, one of the ways that I ramped up on some of the security topics, I would bring my security and IT friends with me to the events. We'd walk the expo hall, and I would see the questions that they would ask for our organization. And that helped me understand how they were thinking and what they needed to solve. And it also gave me insight into what products were ready for us to bring in, which ones were willing to shape their solutions that we could then bring in, and which ones we wouldn't be able to use. And it really accelerated that process. I'm a fan of bringing them along in any scenario because I think that they're great allies in the implementation. Speaking of implementation, are end users typically excited to use XR? What advice do you have to optimize the implementation and to create a smooth pathway there in the early stages?
So you're pulling on my heartstrings here. This is a really powerful one. As a human factors guy, you might imagine. I think the biggest thing is, as humans in general, we like to buy into, but we hate being sold onto. And a lot of times as technologists, we can fall in love with our own reflection, and we think that just because we feel like this is the best thing since sliced bread, that everybody else will believe that too. And one of the biggest barriers, in fact, we have stumbled on it a couple different times, and I think most industries do, and that's where you go and you design things for the end user instead of with them. Really, really powerful that we make sure that we include them. We're just handmaidens. We're support for them. Technology is never the solution. It's always, in a best case, it's always an enabler for a good business process. And so it's really critical that we make sure that we're honoring our end users and make sure that we go to them, head in hand and on bended knee and say, hey, I know nothing about what you do. I'm a dummy. Like, help me understand. I want to help you to do better and make your life better, but I can't do this without you. And be able to humble ourselves and really listen to them deeply and find out what it is they truly need.
So I want to put an exclamation point on this one before we take additional inputs. About almost 10 years ago, I heard Brian on stage talking about culture. And culture can be a challenge if you're not paying attention to it. And we went and thought about what they meant on that and tried to figure it out and changed the way that we did some things in the early stages in the deployment, and that really helped us. So thank you for speaking about it back then. Anyone who's new to this process, this is one to pay attention to, the culture of bringing a new technology in with people and how they're going to receive it and what can you do so that that's a smoother path. Derivative
of Drucker's famous quote, culture eats technology and strategy for breakfast.
Right. It can be very true.
Just one little brief thing I'll tell you guys. So we, at Boeing, we did the augmented reality, started that back in the 90s, and it was for the 777 wiring looms that Dave Cadell and Tom Meisel were working on when they coined that term. Interesting fact, and probably little known, that technology, while it was clunky and very premature at the time, or immature at the time, we were still learning, getting our feet wet. The reason that it didn't succeed wasn't that it was immature. The reason it didn't succeed was cultural problem. We actually had some of the mechanics that were envious of the folks who were on the study. And so they gave the folks who were in it so much guff that we started having the headsets getting broken accidentally. And so you have to be very careful about that. Make sure that you're actually inculcating them into the process and that it's what they need.
Well, I'm flattered to be on an expert panel. I feel like I'm anything but an expert. I'm definitely the rookie of the group. Been doing this only for about 3 years in the role I'm in right now, but I think there was a paradigm shift that I had to make coming into this space related to implementation, and that was going from how do I get people into headsets, changing that from seeing the headset as one medium among many, in which people and artists were reviewing their work. So it was a canvas in which people were reviewing their work. And so for us, it's how do I get artists comfortable working in their environment. So for us, an artist could be working on an animated figure, and that animated figure goes into an attraction, right? Now the attraction may be a flume ride where a boat passes the animated figure, and the animated figure's on the left, and it, does something, and you go by. And all the other aspects of that attraction, you have a set design, you have a ride vehicle, you have other aspects, you have audio, video, all the different elements of that attraction. So for the one individual, the one artist working on their animatronic, how do I get them excited about seeing their work in context of the bigger picture of all the other work that's being created by the artists? Well, one path to that would be put it in an environment, get them into a headset, and allow them to see that. Another path is put them in an environment and let them see it in a 2D space, or put it in an environment and allow them to see it in a tablet, kind of putting it as a pane of glass on a space, or using a phone, or using any other method. And so rather than being uber focused or restricted on how do I get 100 headsets or 300 heads, 400 headsets, a headset into the hands of every Imagineer, how do I think more of it? How do I put myself in the seat of an artist? I'm an artist. I want to see my work in context of other people's work. VR is a medium by which I can do that. Then it's my job as the technologist to figure out how to do that the easiest way possible, in which VR becomes an option, but not the only option. I recognize maybe a little controversial to say at an XR convention, but for us, that's really the realistic approach that I needed to take and our team needed to take, I think, to be more successful in seeing it as one option among many, and where we're solving the pipeline problems before the hardware problems, to get to a point where I think people were more natively interested in, like, ooh, it would be really great if I saw this in a headset. Then kind of have more of a pull engagement than a push engagement.
Yeah, and at Amazon, we always say, like, any headsets now, we treat them basically as a monitor, right? It's a last mile delivery device, just like your phone, just like anything else. And so if you kind of treat it as that, then any new device that comes out, it makes it a little easier. The point I'll add to that, as far as, let's say you did have to deploy a headset or something that is like newer technology, whether it's a scanner, XR device, whatever it may be, is don't just send, especially if it's a site that's, let's say, across the country or somewhere, don't just send the hardware to them. You have to make sure to get a sponsor that stays on that site and actively engages with the people, because if you don't have a sponsor, and specifically sometimes a sponsor that is part of your organization and is directed by your organization, it makes it that much more difficult to find people that once you send them the hardware, that they're going to actively keep using it and enforcing the use of that. So that is something that I learned the hard way, and I had a conversation with the Exxon folks last night a bit about, and they ran in the same situation, and that worked really well for them as well.
I'd say the wearables is kind of one of our stumbling blocks. People are more inclined to adopt the technology, especially with a cell phone or their iPad or a tablet. When we get into the wearables, it is the greatest thing watching someone trying to put a 20-character password in virtual space and then not understanding, did I hit 0? You're like, how many? It's like, and then have to start over. It's not intuitive. And it's the deficiency of the hardware. It's like there is security there, but in the same sense, it's hard for people who are not and tuned with the technology or understand. You have to log in, they have to log in the VPN, and then the two softwares compete with each other, and it's just like people give up. They're like, it's cool, but it's too hard. So that's some things we have to be more informative with our developers of the hardware, is like, how do we make this more adaptable? Because that is the hardest part, especially we were saying is culture. That is I'd spend more time on culture change than actually developing technology. Right. So because they will stop anything. Naysayers will just come in and don't want to understand, and like, it's too hard, and that'll ruin your day.
Yeah, you got to be able to assess if the added capability is worth the friction you're introducing. Yeah.
Yep.
I remember the day when we got eye authentication approved. It was a beautiful day because you didn't have to type a gazillion characters in for a password. And
those poor interface designs also a lot of times lead to security problems, because then people write their password on the bottom of their monitor, or they do a lot of fun stuff to try to skirt the technology that's supposed to save them. So it's a really good point.
Yeah. Okay, so AI is the topic of the day. So the first question, we're going to talk about the risks and the benefits. Do you see risks with AI related to XR?
Everybody loves Skynet. I think there's been a lot of good documentaries lately just on, we do a lot of the things for the positive, and it's very easily to flip to the negative, and it's catastrophic. And a lot of people don't think that way. So for us, and it's kind of good, especially for me coming from reliability, I always look on things how they fail, not how they function. We're always doing that workshops, and kind of going through the think tank and going, hey, we can accomplish this very easily, but what are all the negative outcomes of that? AI makes it too easy, and the other problem is the complacency of, I believe what AI is telling me, like the internet, because if you believe anything on the internet, good luck. But because the hallucinations of the AIs, it wants to satisfy the question, but it doesn't know if it's telling you true things.
One thing to overcome that to an extent, but it's still like heavy in research and you don't see it as often, is data lineage tracking. So when you get the data out, right, if you can see exactly like where the sources of that data comes from, even if it does hallucinate, at least it provides you a way to get back to, let's say, where the true data is. And so I think we're going to see that more and more with a lot of the AI models, whether they run even in the headsets or in the cloud or wherever they're running. It's going to be very important to see like where that data is coming from, what references and sources it used, and hopefully that should dispel a little bit, even if it gives you sometimes a little bit wrong of an answer.
Okay, and before we go to this last question, does anyone have a question? Okay, so we'll move here. While y'all are answering this question, we'll get a microphone over. What are the benefits of AR? Are there potential areas where AI can help us from a security angle?
So one of the big ones that I'm really looking forward to and actually actively investigating is understanding more intimately what is the actual end user doing. How do they accomplish their job? Today, that looks like a lot of time studies and things like that. And if I can have this kind of a digital assistant that, if you will, kind of sits looking over your shoulder and pays attention to all the things that you're doing, then I can crunch that data, and it helps me have a better understanding about your process flow. What are the ebbs and flows of time, that go through a process, all those different kind of things, so that I can do a better job of designing that to make it easier to use.
Yeah, and if you can use it to basically find the right information at the right time.
There's one example actually that we had for a prototype that we did in our team, which was computer vision based. And essentially it was training an AI model at a construction site to just look at camera feeds to make sure everyone is wearing the right protection gear, right? Like they're doing the right thing safety wise. And so it doesn't take a lot. And all it takes, right, is just a flag saying, hey, you need to put your helmet on or something like that, that you can start training models to look for that, and something that is readily available today.
Excellent. Okay, and do we have a question here?
My name is Porter Zahner. I'm from Idaho National Laboratory. It's good to be here. My question related to security was, a couple months ago, I was at a XR Symposium conference at Johns Hopkins University, and they demonstrated it was just a demo, it's not live, but essentially what they had was a model running, a GPT, large language model, in an XR environment. And at runtime, they would query the model for some code to say, hey, select this cube or change this thing in my environment. And it would, at runtime, generate some code, bring it into that environment, and execute on it. And I'm like, that is so cool, and that is so terrible at the same time. So my question to you guys would be, would a good security posture for technology like that be to train the model on very specific requirements and redeploy it, like either in a local environment? Is it more, are you more worried in that situation from a human factors perspective, or are you more worried about the data transmission perspective or the model itself? I'm kind of curious on your take on that.
It's an excellent question. So there's a whole host of things you might imagine. One of the things I'm working on lately is a lot of going through work instructions, making sure they're very clear and deliberate and all that kind of thing. So making sure that you have constrained language, I think, is a really powerful part of that. Even within a manufacturing environment, you'll go from shop to shop, and one group will call it a bat wing, somebody else will call it something else. Nowhere in the engineering drawing will you find that particular reference, to a air quote bat wing. So it's really important that you understand the difference of languages and kind of structure and what people call things. There's a lot to unpack on that. That's a really good question, but I think we could do a whole session on that.
Right.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Say with AI, yeah, you really have to understand the fundamentals of AI. Is like, what is the objective of AI? Is I want to take a repeatable manual process and automate it. You don't just say, hey, AI is magic and it's voodoo and it's just going to solve all world's problems. So you really have to be very cognizant of what you're applying it to and what is the outcome of that. And then how do you audit and measure the effectiveness and confidence of that model? Because a lot of times people don't realize is once you make it a thing, it becomes a real boy and you have to care and feed it, and now it becomes expensive. So.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more quick question, possibly.
Hello, Justin Lebrecq, Raytheon. One thing I would love that is that you pointed out that we need to start with cyber, we need to start with security from the very, very beginning. That's one thing a lot of people forget. But the other thing that a lot of people don't notice is it is a continuous and never-ending conversation with security and cyber. It never ends. You start with it, and you have to run with it for the rest. I can't tell you how many times I've regularly come in on a Monday morning and Windows security updates or iOS updates have bricked our application. Or Enterprise has decided to deploy a whitelisting software that we weren't added to, so our ports are down, our system's down, our browser IIS site is down. So we run into that all the time. I just wanted to hear, are there any pain points that you guys may have run into along the way? Post-live, I'm not even talking about pilot, I'm talking about you are actively live and then hit these things.
We probably have time for one person to answer very quickly. Who would like to take it?
We have learned no. Cybersecurity knows their job is no. If they cannot allow any data flowing, that is, they're satisfied with, I've done my job. So us coming in and try to explain the reason or the benefits are like, no. Or IT says for their policies not awareing you, we get stuff shut down all the time and we're trying to troubleshoot and it's like, oh, we changed our IP or our firewall settings or dependencies. So you really have to have cybersecurity. You have to have your customer involved. You have to have IT involved. There's so many people involved with some of these things that on the commercial side, we use it today. People are on Snapchat and whatever, and it's just like, it just keeps going.
I'm going to sign all you guys up to join me out in the foyer. If anyone has any additional questions, we'll hang out there for a few minutes in case you have any additional topics you want to talk about. And thank you all. Such a fantastic panel today.
Thank you.